Welcome to another deep dive. You guys know how this works. You send us topics you're curious about, and we dive deep into the research.
Aye.
Today's topic, well, honestly, it's one I've been really looking forward to. We're diving into the world of hummingbirds.
Yeah, hummingbirds. They're pretty fascinating little creatures, aren't they? And you guys sent in a ton of great stuff. The Wikipedia article on hummingbirds is especially good, really thorough.
It is really comprehensive overview of everything hummingbird. I mean, we've got their biology, evolution, behavior, even their place in human culture.
And that's what we're here to do, right? Distill all that information down to the most interesting and important bits. Give everyone a real understanding of what makes these birds so unique without, turning it into a boring lecture.
Exactly. So let's get started. When you think hummingbird, what's the first thing that pops into your head?
Well, for me, it's got to be their size, right? I mean, they're tiny. The smallest birds in the world when they're fully grown. We're talking like the bee hummingbird. It's barely longer than your thumbnail, something like 5 centimeters.
Wow, that's tiny. But there are bigger ones too, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The giant hummingbird, like the name suggests, that's the largest. It can get up to around 23 centimeters, but that's still pretty small compared to most birds.
And of course, we can't forget the sound, that iconic hum.
Right, and it's not just a cute name. That hum comes directly from the way they beat their wings. We're talking super fast.
How fast are we talking?
Well, it depends on the species. Bigger ones, like that giant hummingbird, they might only beat their wings around 12 times a second.
Only 12 times. That still seems like a lot.
Oh, it is. But the smaller ones, like the bee hummingbird, they can beat their wings up to almost 100 times a second.
100 times per second. That's insane. No wonder they hum.
Yeah, it's incredible. That rapid flapping is what creates the sound we hear.
So where do these hummingbirds fit in, scientifically?
So in terms of their classification, they belong to the family Trochilidae.
Trochilidae. Okay, so like a family name for all hummingbird species?
Exactly. And there are a lot of them, too. Around 366 different species, grouped into about 113 genera.
Wow, so it's a pretty diverse family.
Oh, incredibly diverse.
Yeah.
And they're found all over the Americas, from Alaska all the way down to the tip of South America, though the greatest variety, you'll find them down in the tropical regions of Central and South America.
That makes sense. More flowers, more nectar, right? 'Cause that's their main food source, isn't it?
You got it. Nectar is their primary fuel. It gives them that quick energy they need for their supercharged lifestyle.
Oh, and I bet their metabolism is just through the roof.
Absolutely. Hummingbirds have the highest metabolic rate of any warm-blooded animal. It's just amazing how much energy they burn through.
So how do they manage to keep up with that? I mean, they must be eating constantly.
They do eat a lot, practically all day long. But there's another trick up their sleeve, and that's something called torpor.
Torpor.
Yeah, it's basically like a mini hibernation. They can slow down their metabolism drastically, especially during cold nights or when food is scarce.
So they're like hitting the pause button on their energy use.
Yeah.
It's pretty clever.
It is, and it's all part of their incredible adaptations for their unique lifestyle. And speaking of adaptations, we can't forget those long beaks.
Oh yeah, those beaks are iconic.
Right.
Perfectly designed for reaching into flowers and sipping up that nectar.
Exactly. But it's not just about reaching the nectar. Their beaks are also closely linked to their amazing flight capabilities. They can hover, fly backwards, even upside down.
It's true. And their wing movement, it's so unique. It's not just flapping up and down like most birds.
Right. It's more like a figure-8 motion. They rotate their wings at the shoulder, which allows them to generate lift on both the upstroke and the downstroke. And that gives them their incredible maneuverability.
Okay, we've talked about some of the basics, but let's get into the nitty-gritty of their biology. Let's start with their physical structure, their morphology.
Sure, so they've got these really compact, streamlined bodies. Everything about their shape is designed to minimize drag and make them super efficient flyers. Their wings, they're not like the broad, curved wings of a hawk or an eagle. They're more like blades.
Glades.
Yeah, like really narrow and stiff. And the way they attach to the shoulder joint is also unique. It's what allows for that helicopter-like movement we talked about.
Makes sense. And what about their feet? They're not really built for walking, are they?
You're right about that. They have 3 toes pointing forward and 1 pointing backward. It's great for gripping onto branches or wires, perching, but they don't really walk or hop around on the ground like other birds. Their legs are just not designed for that.
So their strength is really in their wings and their grip. Fascinating. And despite being so small, they can really move, can't they?
Oh yeah, they're fast, like surprisingly fast. In level flight, they can reach speeds over 50 kilometers per hour. And during those crazy courtship dives, some males can hit speeds of up to 80 kilometers per hour.
That's incredible. For such a tiny creature, that's some serious speed. Speaking of courtship, let's talk about their life cycle. Mating, I've heard it's pretty quick.
Yeah, it's really brief. The actual transfer of sperm can happen in just a few seconds.
Well, that's quick. And after that, the female is pretty much on her own, right?
Pretty much. She builds the nest, she incubates the eggs, she raises the young.
And what are those nests like?
Oh, they're these tiny, perfectly crafted cups. And the materials they use, it's amazing. They use things like spider webs for elasticity, lichens and moss for camouflage, and soft plant fibers for lining.
Spider webs.
Mm.
Seriously. That's so ingenious. Talk about using what you've got.
It is, isn't it? And the eggs themselves are tiny, too, like pea size. They're the smallest bird eggs in the world.
And I'm guessing they don't lay many at a time?
Usually just two. And the incubation period is pretty short, about 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the species and the weather. Once the chicks hatch, they're completely helpless. They rely on their mom for everything, from food to warmth.
There's a lot of work for the female.
Definitely. But those chicks grow up fast. They fledge, meaning they leave the nest, after about 3 weeks.
So for a bird that lives such a high-energy life, they can actually live for a decent amount of time.
Yeah, it's surprising, right? I mean, not all of them make it. A lot of them don't survive their first year because of predators or bad weather or just, life being tough. But the ones that do survive can live for a few years. Some species, like the ruby-throated hummingbird, they live an average of 3 to 5 years. And some of the tiny tropical ones can even live close to 10 years.
That's pretty amazing for a bird that's always on the go.
Yeah.
Now, we did get some questions about hummingbird populations, and you sent some info that's a little worrying.
Yeah, unfortunately. While some species, especially in the US and Canada, they seem to be doing okay, a lot of hummingbird species across the Americas are facing some serious challenges.
Challenges like what?
Habitat loss is a big one. Deforestation, urbanization, humans taking over their natural spaces. And then there are things like collisions with windows. They can get caught in spider webs or eaten by cats. Pesticides are a problem too because they kill off the insects that hummingbirds need for food.
Right, we mentioned that they eat insects too, not just nectar. It's all connected. And climate change, that's got to be playing a role too, right?
Oh, definitely. Climate change can affect the timing of when flowers bloom, which can mess with their migration patterns. And it can also affect the availability of insects. It's a complex issue with a lot of factors. But the bottom line is that a lot of hummingbird species are in decline, and some are even considered endangered.
That's really sad to hear. But there was one bright spot in the research you sent, the story of Anna's hummingbird.
Oh yeah, that's a really interesting case. They're actually doing really well. Their population has been increasing, and they've been expanding their range northward along the Pacific coast.
So what's their secret? How are they thriving when others are struggling?
Well, scientists think it has to do with a few things. For one, they seem to be adapting well to urban environments. They're finding food in gardens and from feeders.
Makes sense. More people planting flowers and putting out feeders.
Exactly. And milder winters might be helping too. They're able to survive in areas that were too cold for them before. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. Some species are facing serious threats, but others are showing amazing resilience.
It just goes to show how adaptable nature can be. And speaking of adaptations, let's talk about how hummingbirds experience the world. Their vision is particularly fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. Their vision is incredible. For starters, their eyes are proportionally huge. They take up a big part of their skull. And they have a ton of those retinal ganglion cells, which are the cells that transmit visual information to the brain.
So they're taking in a lot of visual data.
Tons of it. And not only that, but they can see colors that we can't even imagine.
Seriously, like what?
Well, we humans, we have 3 types of color-sensitive cones in our eyes. But hummingbirds, they have 4.
4. What's the actual one for?
That 4th cone allows them to see ultraviolet light, which is invisible to us.
Wow, a whole spectrum of color that we're missing out on. That must make the world look so different to them.
I can only imagine. And their vision is incredibly sensitive to movement, too. They can detect even the slightest twitch and react instantly. It's essential for their acrobatics, for hovering, and for avoiding collisions in midair.
It's like they have built-in radar. Now, we've talked about the humming sound they make with their wings, but it's not just about flight, is it? It's also a form of communication.
You're right. That buzzing can act as a signal to other hummingbirds. It can let them know, hey, I'm here, this is my territory, or hey, there's good food over here.
So it's like their own little language.
In a way, yeah. But they also have a range of vocalizations, too. Chirps, squeaks, whistles, all sorts of sounds. And they can even learn new vocalizations.
Wait, they can learn new sounds? That's pretty unusual for birds, isn't it?
It is. Most birds are born with their songs pretty much hardwired. But hummingbirds can learn and modify their sounds by imitating others. It's pretty cool.
So they have a more complex communication system than we might think. What about their sense of taste? I mean, they're obsessed with nectar, so they must have a pretty well-developed sweet tooth.
They do. But it's interesting how they taste sweetness. See, most birds, they don't have the same sweet taste receptor that mammals do. But hummingbirds, they've kind of hacked their taste system.
Hacked.
Yeah, it's like they've repurposed their umami receptor, the one that detects savory flavors, to perceive sweetness in nectar. It's a really clever evolutionary adaptation.
So what we taste as savory, they taste as sweet. That's pretty wild.
It is, and it's allowed them to thrive on a diet that most birds wouldn't even consider. Now, their sense of smell, it's not as strong as their vision or hearing, but there's some evidence that they might be able to detect certain scents, like the chemicals that insects release.
So maybe they can smell if a flower is already being used by insects.
That's one possibility. It could help them avoid flowers that aren't worth their time.
Fascinating stuff. Now, let's talk about that crazy metabolism again. It's the highest of any vertebrate, right?
It is, and it has to be to support their incredible energy demands. I mean, those wings are beating constantly and they're flying at amazing speeds. The amount of oxygen their muscles use is just mind-blowing.
And they're able to convert that sugar from nectar into usable energy almost instantly.
Right. They're like little sugar-powered rockets.
Yeah.
Their bodies are super efficient at breaking down and using those simple sugars. And there's actually a genetic component to this, too. They've lost a gene that most animals have.
Lost a gene. How does losing something make them more efficient?
Well, this gene, called FBP2, it plays a role in turning non-carbohydrate sources into glucose. But hummingbirds, they don't need that. They get all the glucose they need directly from nectar. So by losing this gene, they've streamlined their metabolism even further.
It's like evolution decided to simplify things and make them hyper-specialized for their nectar-based diet.
Exactly. And it works incredibly well for them. But it does mean they need to eat almost constantly. Now, when they're not eating, that's when torpor kicks in. It's their way of conserving energy when food is scarce, like at night.
And it's a pretty dramatic change.
Oh, totally. Their body temperature drops, their heart rate slows way down. They're basically in a state of suspended animation.
Just to survive the night. That's incredible. And then there are the migrations. Some of these tiny birds travel unbelievable distances.
Right. The rufous hummingbird, for example, it migrates from Alaska all the way down to Mexico. That's thousands of miles.
Thousands of miles for a bird that weighs only a few grams. It's mind-boggling how they do it.
It is. And they're not the only ones. Lots of hummingbird species migrate, following the blooms of flowers and the availability of insects. It's a testament to their endurance and their navigational skills.
All right, let's dive a little deeper into their feeding strategies. We know nectar is their main fuel, but how do they actually get it out of the flowers?
They've got some pretty neat tricks. Their beaks, as we discussed, are perfectly shaped for reaching into flowers. It's their tongues that are the real marvel. Yeah, their tongues are long and forked, and they've got these tiny grooves along them called lamellae. When they dip their tongue into nectar, those lamellae trap the liquid, and then they use a rapid pumping motion to draw the nectar up.
So it's not just licking, it's like they're actively pumping the nectar into their mouth.
Exactly.
No.
And it's incredibly efficient. But remember, nectar doesn't provide all the nutrients they need. They also rely on insects for protein and other essential stuff.
Right, and they have different ways of catching those insects.
Oh yeah, they're pretty versatile. They can snatch insects out of the air, pick them off leaves, even steal them from spider webs.
It's like they've mastered every insect hunting technique.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that really struck me when we were researching this is the incredible variety of beak shapes among hummingbirds.
It is amazing, isn't it? And it all comes down to that coevolution with flowers that we talked about earlier. Over millions of years, hummingbirds and the flowers they pollinate have shaped each other's evolution.
So different beak shapes have evolved to match different flower shapes.
Exactly. Long, slender beaks for tubular flowers, short, stout beaks for flowers with more open access, and even curved beaks like the sword-billed hummingbird, which has a beak longer than its body.
It's like a perfect fit for each type of flower. And that's not all. They're not just attracted to any flower, are they?
No, they definitely have their preferences. Color plays a big role. They're drawn to bright, vibrant colors like red, orange, and pink. And they've also learned to recognize the locations of flowers that produce the best nectar.
So it's not just about looks, they're also paying attention to the quality and quantity of the nectar. Smart birds.
They are, and it makes sense, right? They need to maximize their energy intake to support that incredible metabolism.
Absolutely. All right, before we wrap up, let's talk about hummingbirds in human culture. It seems they've held a special place in many different societies.
They have. In ancient Aztec culture, hummingbirds were seen as symbols of strength and vitality. They even believed that warriors were reincarnated as hummingbirds after they died.
Wow, that's powerful imagery.
It is. And in other cultures, they're associated with love, joy, and good luck. In Trinidad and Tobago, the hummingbird is even on their coat of arms.
They're clearly more than just birds to many people.
Absolutely. And in modern times, with the popularity of hummingbird feeders, they've become even more beloved. People love watching them flit around their gardens.
And it's important to remember that if you're going to put out a feeder, you need to make the right kind of nectar.
Right. The best nectar is just a simple solution of sugar and water. No honey, no dyes, no fancy stuff. Just plain white sugar dissolved in water.
Simple is best. It's amazing how much we've learned about these tiny creatures. They're so much more complex and fascinating than I ever realized.
I agree. They're a testament to the incredible diversity and adaptability of life on Earth.
And as we've seen, they're also facing some very real challenges. Habitat loss, climate change, pesticides, all these things were putting pressure on their populations.
It's true. We need to be aware of these threats and do what we can to protect these amazing birds.
Absolutely. So here's a thought for all of you listening. What role can we play in ensuring the future of hummingbirds? How can we help them thrive in a changing world? It's something to consider as we finish this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. Shanghai, right. It's everywhere these days. You see those amazing pictures of the skyline, hear about how powerful its economy is. I mean, it's obviously a huge deal on the world stage.
It really is.
And I bet, being the curious person you are, you've probably thought, what's the story there? How did it all happen?
I know I have.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to do today, dive deep into Shanghai.
Yeah, let's do it.
Our starting point. The Wikipedia entry for Shanghai.
Sounds good.
We're going to pull out all the fascinating stuff, the important bits, so you get the whole picture.
The juicy bits.
Without having to spend hours reading online. Right?
Exactly. We'll do the heavy lifting for you.
So you ready to jump in?
Absolutely.
One thing that really blew me away, honestly.
Yeah.
Shanghai, this super modern city, all those skyscrapers and businesses. It started as a tiny fishing village. Can you believe that?
And it's pretty incredible, isn't it?
It's mind-blowing. That's the journey we're taking today.
Buckle up.
From that small village to this global powerhouse.
Quite the transformation.
We'll look at how it began. The crazy growth in the 19th and 20th centuries, its location, the weather there, the politics, the culture, and how it became this financial and tech giant.
It's all connected, you know. The geography influenced the early trade, which brought in the world's attention.
Yeah.
That shaped its culture and eventually its political importance.
That's a puzzle.
Yeah, a really interesting puzzle.
So rewind all the way back. It wasn't always about fancy buildings in the stock market, right?
Oh, no, not at all.
How did Shanghai even begin?
Well, people have been living in that area for a long time, like around 6,000 years.
Wow.
But if we're talking about a real settlement, that's probably that fishing village and market town you mentioned.
Okay.
Back in the spring and autumn and warring states periods. That's a long time ago, 771 to 221 BC.
Yeah, ancient history.
Different kingdoms ruled the area. First it was Wu, then Yu, and then this big, powerful state called Chu.
That's where we get the nickname Shen from, right?
You got it.
From that Chu period.
Yeah, exactly. In the 3rd century BC, Shanghai was part of the land controlled by this guy, Lord Chenshin of Chu.
Important guy.
He was a big deal. He's the one who had them widen and dredge what we now call the Huangpu River.
Oh, wow.
Back then, they called it the Chenshin River after him,
right.
And that's where Shen comes from. They still use it today, you know, like on license plates.
That's really cool. So from a river, basically.
Basically, yeah.
And there's another nickname, right? Something about the fishermen.
Oh, yeah, the hu. The fishermen had this special tool they used for fishing called a hu.
Oh.
And get this, the river where Suzhou Creek meets the Huangpu, they named it after this tool. And over time, hu also became another nickname for Shanghai.
So two nicknames, both from the water.
Exactly. Water was super important to them, even way back then.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit. Tang and Song dynasties.
Yeah.
Qinglong Town shows up. What's the big deal with that place?
Qinglong Town. Now, this was a really important trading hub. Big time. We're talking 7th to 13th centuries AD. It became massive. Giant town of the southeast, they called it.
Wow.
13 Buddhist temples, 7 pagodas, a lot going on.
Sounds busy.
It wasn't just local trade along the Yangtze or the coast. They traded with Japan, Silla, an ancient Korean kingdom.
So they were connected to other countries already.
Yeah, a real international hub, even back then.
That's fascinating. So why the move? Why did things shift to where Shanghai is now?
By the late Song dynasty, around the 12th and 13th centuries, things started to move down the Wusong River.
Okay.
Probably happened gradually. Maybe
Yeah.
the river changed, Qinglong's harbor silted up.
Right.
Whatever the reason, the trading center moved to where Shanghai is now.
Makes sense. And Shanghai itself was growing, right?
Yeah, it was officially a market town by 1074.
So no longer just a village.
Upgraded.
Upgraded. But
Yeah.
for a long time, it was under Songjiang Prefecture, right?
A long time, from 1292 to 1927.
That's like, what, 600 years?
Yeah, about that.
Mm.
All that time, it was a part of Songjiang.
Wow. So they built a wall in 1554,
A big one, too.
10 meters high, 5 kilometers long,
Yeah.
all to keep out Japanese pirates.
They were a real problem back then.
Yeah, but it shows how important Shanghai was already.
Yeah, even though it wasn't politically powerful, it was making money. They needed to protect that.
And then they get a city god temple in 1602. That's a big deal, right?
A huge deal. Usually only really important cities got those temples.
It's like capitals and stuff.
Exactly. So for Shanghai to get one, even though it was just a county seat, it meant they were recognizing its economic power, you know?
They needed to keep the city god happy.
Right.
Then the Qing dynasty rolls around. And there are some big changes that make Shanghai the international port it's known for.
Big changes. In 1684, the Kangxi Emperor, he lifts a ban on ocean-going ships.
Oh, wow.
That ban had been around for ages, like 150 years.
Wow.
So suddenly, trade explodes along the coast.
Makes sense.
But then, in 1732, the Qianlong Emperor makes a really smart move.
What did he do?
He moves the customs office for the whole Jiangsu province to Shanghai.
A whole province.
The whole thing. And he gives Shanghai the power to collect customs on all foreign trade in Jiangsu.
That's massive.
Huge. So even though Shanghai was still low on the administrative ladder, it was now the main trading port for the entire lower Yangtze region.
Oh, because of one decision.
One decision changed everything.
That's right.
And that, by the way, is a lesson for today. Smart policies can completely change a region's future.
Yeah, for sure. And it's this growing economic power that catches the world's eye in the 19th century, right?
Exactly. The European powers, they saw how much potential Shanghai had.
Yeah, the location's perfect, right?
Right on the Yangtze, access to all of China's interior. And that leads to the Opium Wars.
Ah,
First Opium War, 1839-1842, the British occupy Shanghai.
and then the Treaty of Nanking in 1842. That's the one that changes everything, right?
It changes everything. Shanghai becomes one of 5 treaty ports, open to the world for trade and residence.
A new chapter begins.
A new chapter with a lot of foreign influence, but also huge economic growth.
And that's when we get the international settlement and the French concession.
Right. These were like mini countries within Shanghai run by foreigners.
Wow.
They had their own laws, police, everything. And their own architecture, which made Shanghai so unique.
Like a mix of East and West.
Exactly. The international settlement especially just explodes with growth.
Becomes the center of Asia.
By the 1930s, yeah. It was a time of amazing progress, but also a time when China didn't have full control over its own city.
A complicated time.
Definitely. And then, of course, World War II, the Battle of Shanghai was brutal.
Devastating it.
One of the biggest and bloodiest battles of the entire war.
Wow.
Shanghai was basically destroyed. All that progress just gone.
Terrible setback.
A terrible setback. But then, after the war, the People's Republic of China is established in 1949. A new era for Shanghai.
A new era. And it stays important, right?
Yep.
One of only 3 municipalities not merged into the provinces.
That's right. Alongside Beijing and Tianjin, Shanghai remained independent, reporting directly to the central government,
Showing its importance.
showing its importance. But then the Cold War starts,
Ah, yeah.
and Shanghai's global influence shrinks. Trade is mostly limited to socialist countries.
Right.
Those connections to the West from the treaty port days, they're mostly gone.
From a global hub to something more internal.
Yeah, a big shift. But then, in the 1980s, Deng Xiaoping starts his economic reforms.
Game changer.
Total game changer. Shanghai gets a huge makeover, especially Pudong.
Across the river.
Yeah. The goal was to make Shanghai a center for finance again, attract foreign investment, all that.
And it worked, right?
Big time. By the 1990s, Shanghai's back in the game. The Shanghai Stock Exchange is created.
Which is huge now, right?
The largest in the Asia-Pacific region by market cap.
Amazing. And the Shanghai Free Trade Zone.
The first one in mainland China. It was a test zone for new economic ideas, ways to attract foreign money.
Like a laboratory.
Exactly. It was crucial for opening up China's economy.
Wow. And today, Shanghai is one of the top financial centers in the world.
Top tier, Alpha Plus city.
Yeah.
And the number of Fortune Global 500 companies headquartered there is just incredible.
13. The fourth highest in the world.
That tells you something. It's a global economic powerhouse.
No doubt. And it's a center for research and development too, right?
Oh, yeah. Some of the best universities in Asia are there. Fudan, Shanghai, Jiaotong.
Big names.
They attract the best and brightest from all over.
And the infrastructure is insane. The Shanghai Metro.
The biggest metro network in the world.
It's just mind-blowing how much they've built.
And it all adds up to Shanghai being the showpiece of China's economy.
The star of the show.
One of the 10 biggest economic hubs in the world. From a fishing village to that, it's amazing.
Truly amazing. Okay, let's talk about the place itself. Shanghai's location and climate, they've definitely shaped the city, right?
No question. It's positioned right on the Yangtze River Delta, where the river meets the sea. That's been key to its success as a port city.
Makes sense.
And it borders Zhejiang and Jiangsu provinces.
Right.
Interestingly, a lot of the land, especially where those skyscrapers are, is pretty new.
New.
Yeah, created by silt from the Yangtze or land reclamation projects.
Oh, wow.
So the ground is mostly sand.
Huh. I never thought of that.
Which means they need to build those skyscrapers on really deep concrete piles.
Otherwise, they'd sink.
Pretty much.
Wow, that's amazing. And the municipality includes more than just the city center, right?
Right. It covers the whole Yangtze estuary and a bunch of islands.
Like Chongming.
Chongming is the biggest one. After all the land reclamation in the 20th century, it's the second largest island in mainland China.
That's huge.
It is. But it gets a little complicated.
How so?
There's a little bit of Jiangsu province on the north of Chongming. And the islands that make up Yangshan Deepwater Port, which is super important for Shanghai,
Yeah.
they actually belong to Zhejiang province.
So it's like a patchwork quilt?
Kinda, yeah. A lot of moving pieces.
What about the weather? Shanghai's on the coast, so it must have some interesting seasons.
It does. It's a humid subtropical climate, 4 distinct seasons.
Okay.
Winters are cool to cold, pretty damp.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get those northwest winds that can bring freezing temperatures.
Brr.
Not much snow, though, just a few days a year.
Okay. And summers?
Summers are hot and humid with lots of rain and thunderstorms.
Sounds intense.
It can get really hot, over 35 degrees Celsius for days on end.
Oh, man.
And they get typhoons, too, especially in late summer and early autumn.
Gotta watch out for those.
Yeah, every coastal city has to deal with typhoons.
So spring and autumn are probably the best times then?
Usually, yeah. Spring can be a bit unpredictable.
Right.
But autumn is nice, sunny, dry, probably the most comfortable time to visit.
Good to know. And the average temperature?
In downtown Shanghai, it's around 17.5 degrees Celsius for the year.
Not too bad.
A bit cooler in the suburbs and on the islands.
Makes sense. And they've had some extremes, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The lowest was Nennisted 10.1 degrees Celsius back in 1977.
That's cold.
And in recent years, they've hit over 40 degrees Celsius.
So a wide range.
Pretty big range, yeah.
All right, let's move on to politics. How does Shanghai work government-wise?
Well, like all of mainland China, the Communist Party is in charge.
Right.
But it's a bit more nuanced than that.
How so?
You have the party secretary, who's the top dog,
Okay.
and then you have the mayor.
Right.
But the party secretary has more power.
So it's like two bosses, but one is more important.
Yeah, kind of. The party secretary sets the overall direction, the big picture stuff.
Makes sense.
And the mayor, they handle the day-to-day running of the city.
Like the CEO and the COO.
Exactly. And it's interesting, being a top official in Shanghai is often a stepping stone to bigger things. Yeah, a lot of people who were party secretary in Shanghai ended up with really high positions in the central government.
Like who?
Jiang Zemin, for example. He was party secretary in Shanghai before becoming general secretary of the CCP. Same with Zhu Rongji, Xi Jinping, and Li Cheng, the current premier.
So Shanghai's a proving ground.
Basically, yeah. If you do well there, you might get promoted to the big leagues.
That's fascinating. And administratively, Shanghai is divided into 16 districts.
16, yeah, each with its own personality.
Like Huangpu, right, the heart of the city.
The heart, yeah. That's where City Hall is, Nanjing Road.
The famous shopping street.
That's the one. And then you have other core districts, all west of the river. Zuhui, Channing, Jing'an, Putuo, Hangkou, Yangpu.
That's a lot.
And across the river, of course, you have Pudong.
The new financial district.
Exactly. And then the rest are mostly suburban or rural.
Like Minhang, Baoshan, all those.
Yeah, all those. A real mix of urban and rural under one big municipality.
A little bit of everything. Now, let's talk money. Shanghai's economy is massive, right?
Massive is an understatement. It's a huge part of China's economy.
Give me some numbers.
In 2023, Shanghai accounted for 18.5% of China's total imports and exports.
That's insane.
It's one of the most expensive cities in the world to live in.
And one of the wealthiest.
Top 5 globally.
So it's a financial powerhouse, as we've discussed. The stock exchange, the free trade zone.
All that. But it's not just finance. Shanghai is also a big player in manufacturing and heavy industry.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They have some of the biggest state-owned companies there. Baosteel, for example, one of China's biggest steel makers.
Wow.
And Hudong Zhonghua, they build ships.
I didn't know that.
And the car industry is huge there, too. SAI Motor is based in Shanghai.
I've heard of them.
They're a big deal. And then, of course, there's tourism.
Shanghai's a popular destination.
Very popular. In 2023, tourism brought in a lot of money for the city.
Both domestic and international.
Both. And Shanghai is becoming a big hub for conferences and meetings, too.
So it's attracting people from all over.
All the time. It's a real economic hub.
No doubt. Okay, let's switch gears again. Culture and society. Shanghai is famous for its mix of East and West, right?
That's the essence of Hai culture.
Hype.
Yeah, it's the name for that unique blend of cultures you find in Shanghai. You have the traditional Wu Yu culture from the Jiangnan region.
Okay.
And then you have all those Western influences that came in when Shanghai opened up as a treaty port.
It's a mix of everything.
Exactly. You see it everywhere.
Yeah.
The language, the food, the architecture, the music. It's all Hai.
Give me some examples.
Well, they take architecture. You have the traditional Jinyan style, all about waterways and gardens.
Beautiful.
And then you have the grand European-style buildings, the wide streets.
A stark contrast.
Totally. And in art, you might have traditional Chinese music being played with Western instruments.
Fusion.
A fusion, yeah. And fashion, too. Shanghainese fashion takes inspiration from all over the world, but keeps that local touch.
So it's a global city with a local soul.
That's a great way to put it.
And the language is unique, too, right?
Oh, yeah. Shanghainese is part of the Wu Chinese family.
Different from Mandarin.
Very different. Mandarin is the official language, and most people in Shanghai can speak it. But Shanghainese has its own sounds, words, grammar. It's a completely different language.
That's amazing. And there are people trying to keep it alive, right?
Oh, yeah. Lots of efforts to preserve Shanghainese. It's part of what makes Shanghai special.
It's part of its identity.
Absolutely. And the food is amazing, too.
I've heard good things.
Oh, it's incredible. They have influences from Jiangsu and Zhejiang provinces, but Shanghai cuisine has its own thing going on.
What are some of the must-try dishes?
Well, you got to have xiaolongbao,
The soup dumpling.
soup dumplings, and xingkan too, the pan-fried buns. They have amazing scallion oil noodles, pork chops with rice cakes, crystal shrimp.
My mouth is watering.
It's a real feast for the senses. And like the culture itself, the food is a mix of different influences.
Speaking of mixing, the architecture in Shanghai is really interesting. You have those old Shikumen houses and then these super modern skyscrapers.
It's a city of contrasts. The Shikumen houses are really special.
Tell me about them.
They're like 2- or 3-story brick houses, all lined up in narrow alleys.
I've seen pictures.
They're a mix of Western terrace houses and traditional Jiangnan architecture.
A hybrid.
Exactly. And then you have the skyscrapers, the Jinmao Tower, the Shanghai World Financial Center, the Shanghai Tower.
Which is the tallest in China, right?
That's right. Shanghai's skyline is always changing, always pushing the boundaries.
So they're looking to the future, but also keeping the past alive.
They're finding a balance.
I like that. And what about the people who live in Shanghai? It must be a diverse bunch.
Oh, incredibly diverse. Shanghai has the highest life expectancy in mainland China.
Wow, really?
Yeah, so there's a lot of older folks.
Makes sense.
And tons of people have moved there from other provinces in recent decades.
Drawn by the opportunities.
Exactly. And historically, Shanghai has been a place of refuge, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, during World War II, it was a safe haven for Jewish refugees fleeing Europe.
I forgot about that.
They formed the Shanghai Ghetto.
A reminder of a dark time.
It is, but it also shows that Shanghai has a big heart.
It does. And even with all the modernity, there's still a lot of traditional stuff going on.
Absolutely. You have temples, Taoist centers.
The city god temple is still going strong.
That's right. It's a place where people can connect with their heritage.
And Shanghai is a big center for education, too. Right?
Huge. Some of the best universities in China are in Shanghai. Fudan, Shanghai Jiaotong, Tongji, East China, Normal University.
They attract students from all over
China and the world.
a real global hub for learning. And to keep all this going, you need good transportation.
Absolutely crucial. And Shanghai has it all.
The metro, of course.
The metro is the backbone, but they also have buses, ferries.
Ferries across the river.
Yeah, across the Huangpu. And taxis are everywhere.
Sounds efficient.
It is. And they have all those expressways, bridges, tunnels.
Everything.
Connecting everything. And fun fact, the first railway in China was built in Shanghai.
Really?
Yeah, the Wusong Railway. It didn't last long, but it was a big deal at the time.
Wow. And nowadays you have high-speed rail.
4 lines connecting Shanghai to the rest of the country.
Amazing. And 2 airports, right?
Pudong, mainly for international flights.
And Hongqiao for domestic.
Exactly. And let's not forget the port.
The port of Shanghai.
One of the busiest in the world. It's a testament to Shanghai's role in global trade.
It's mind-blowing how connected Shanghai is, both within China and to the rest of the world.
It's a truly global city. And they have all those sister city relationships, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 68 sister cities in 57 countries.
That's a lot of friends.
It is. Places like Yokohama, Milan, San Francisco, Hamburg, Sao Paulo.
From all over the map.
It just shows you how connected Shanghai is to the world.
So to wrap things up, the journey of Shanghai is pretty incredible, right?
It's mind-blowing, really.
From a tiny fishing village to this global megacity.
A story of growth, adaptation, change.
Shaped by its location, its politics, the economy, its culture.
It's a fascinating mix of factors. What always strikes me is how its economic power was clear, even when it wasn't politically that important.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Like, getting that city god temple back in the 17th century.
When it was just a county seat.
Exactly. It shows that Shanghai has always had this entrepreneurial spirit.
It was destined for greatness.
It seems that way.
And it makes you wonder, what's next for Shanghai?
What will the next chapter be?
It's already so advanced, so influential.
How will it continue to evolve?
That's something for you, our listener, to think about.
Yeah. What do you think the future holds for Shanghai?
It's a city that never stops changing.
Always pushing boundaries.
It's been an incredible journey exploring Shanghai's story.
I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
And until next time, keep exploring.
Keep those curious minds engaged.
Absolutely.
All right, so welcome to another deep dive. And today we're tackling, it's a big one, right? It's Arthur Schopenhauer's.
It is.
The World as Will and Representation.
Yeah.
Which, that's the English title, obviously.
Right.
The original German, Die Welt als Will und Vorstellung. And this is, really like the core.
It is.
This is Schopenhauer's philosophy. It's not just some, little side thing he was working on.
Right.
It first came out in late 1818, though the title page says 1819, so there's a little bit of publication date nuance.
A little bit of a discrepancy.
Yeah, a little discrepancy there. And then he kept working on it, put out an expanded edition in 1844, which added a whole second volume. And again in 1859.
Right.
The year before he died.
Yeah.
Now, if that seems a little daunting, 2 volumes, multiple editions.
Yeah.
The writer, Thomas Mann, put together an abridged version in 1948. So if you're looking for,
a shorter route,
a slightly shorter way in,
yeah,
that's out there. But what we're going to try and do in this deep dive is pull out the real core insights from this pretty monumental text.
Yeah. Our mission here is really to, give you the Schopenhauer without having to wade through every single page.
Yeah.
Give you a real grasp of what are his key ideas? Why are they important?
Yeah. And I think it helps if we know a little bit about where Schopenhauer was coming from before he wrote this? Like, what had he already been thinking about?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, he got his doctorate, obviously, and he wrote his dissertation on the fourfold root of the principle of sufficient reason back in 1813, and then a treatise on vision and colors in 1816.
Yeah.
So he was already, sort of...
He was warming up
the philosophical engine to produce this.
Exactly. Yeah, those are really key because they're kind of laying the groundwork, the dissertation, especially. I mean, that's
really crucial.
And what's so interesting is that Schopenhauer himself said this whole work, as big as it is, basically conveys a single thought.
Right.
He said that. Like, that's
what he said. He was just looking at it from a multitude of different angles.
A single thought, huh? All right, challenge accepted.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin with something this ambitious?
Well, I think the core of his system really lies in this fundamental duality that he sets up. So it's the world as representation, which in German is Vorstellung, and the underlying will. So the world as we experience it, everything you see, you hear, you touch, it exists in space and time, it unfolds causally, all those things we take for granted. That, according to Schopenhauer, exists purely as representation. It's totally dependent on a knowing subject.
Okay, so this conversation we're having, the device you're listening on, you and me, we're all just...
Phenomena, appearances.
We're all just appearances, like in a sense.
In a sense.
Yeah, right. And so that's where this Vorstellung, the German word and the translations, it gets really interesting because you'll see it translated as idea, especially in older translations, more commonly as representation, but there's an argument to be made for presentation. Particularly by the translator Richard Aquila.
So why presentation? Like, what's the thinking there?
Well, Aquila emphasizes the almost theatrical nature of experience. So presentation really captures the sense that the world is a performance.
Okay.
That it's a drama playing out on the stage of our minds, and you are the presenter.
Okay.
Right. And Vorstellung can refer to both what is presented, the object, as well as the act of presenting.
Right.
So he feels like representation kind of misses that active role.
Right. It sounds more...
It's much more active.
Yeah. So it's not just this, passive thing that we're just sort of observing.
Right, exactly.
We're actively involved in creating.
Yeah, you're shaping it, you're presenting it, you are the author of this drama of your experience.
Okay, so this world of presentations, this reality that kind of shaped by our minds, it's not just floating in empty space though, right? There's something beneath it.
Right, exactly. And that's where the will comes in.
Okay.
So Schopenhauer identifies this underlying thing in itself, this inner essence of everything, as the will. And it's crucial here to understand this isn't the conscious will that we think of, when we're deciding, oh, should I have pizza tonight or tacos, that kind of, deliberative will.
Okay.
Instead, this is a blind, unconscious, and really aimless striving. It's a fundamental urge, a raw energy that just permeates all of existence. It's not in space and time. It's unified. There's no divisions in it.
So like a basic unconscious drive.
Exactly. At the heart of everything.
Okay, that's already pretty mind-bending.
It is.
But Schopenhauer wasn't just, pulling this out of thin air, right? He was building on the ideas of some pretty major figures, right? Like
absolutely.
Kant, obviously.
Yeah.
Especially Kant.
I mean, he explicitly states that his whole philosophy takes Kant's transcendental idealism as its starting point.
Okay.
So...
And his dissertation was called On the Fourfold Root of the Principle of Sufficient Reason.
Right.
I mean, that sounds like it's pretty relevant.
Oh, he considered that absolutely essential preliminary reading for this. Yeah, he's like, you can't understand my main work without understanding what I'm doing in that dissertation.
So to understand Schopenhauer, you got to read Kant.
You kind of do.
And then you got to read Schopenhauer's take on Kant.
Well, yeah, I mean, he saw his work as a continuation and even a completion of Kant's project.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there's also that famous appendix to Volume 1 called Critique of the Kantian Philosophy.
Right.
So it wasn't all just, building blocks, right? There was some demolition.
Yeah, there's some innovation going on.
Okay.
So as much as he admired Kant, he also thought he had found some fundamental errors in his system.
Okay.
And so in that critique, he takes issue with key aspects of Kant's epistemology.
Yeah.
How we know what we know.
Right.
His ethics, his aesthetics, really like across the board.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what was his reasoning there? Like, what was he why was he pushing back so hard?
Well, I mean, Schopenhauer really felt that Kant was too focused on creating this really neat, like, symmetrical system.
Okay.
And he argued that Kant kind of forced reality into these 12 predefined boxes,
Okay.
which Schopenhauer called blind windows.
Okay.
Instead, Schopenhauer proposed that our minds really only have 3 fundamental a priori forms.
Okay.
These are ways of understanding that we bring to experience rather than deriving from it.
Okay.
Time, space, and causality.
So much simpler.
Much simpler toolkit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For how we understand the world. Okay. So
Yeah.
that's a pretty major difference right there.
It is. It is.
And then there's this whole question of the thing in itself.
Right.
Kant believed it was totally unknowable.
Right.
Right. Beyond.
Yeah, we can't know the noumenon,
Yeah.
this thing in itself.
Schopenhauer agreed with that to a point.
Yeah,
But he.
to a point.
Yeah. So what was his sort of.
Well, he agreed that we can't have direct intellectual knowledge of the noumenon.
Okay.
However, he argued that we do have a unique kind of access to it through our own bodies
Yeah.
and our experience of willing. He saw this inner awareness of our own will as a window into the reality that lies behind the world as representation.
Okay. So we feel this will within ourselves.
Exactly.
And that gives us a clue to.
That gives us a clue to this deeper reality.
Okay. So, I mean, the book itself, Volume 1, is divided into 4 books.
Yeah.
And it goes, if I remember correctly, from epistemology, how we know, to ontology,
The nature of being.
the nature of being, then aesthetics, and finally ethics.
Yep.
So that seems like a very deliberate progression.
It is, but Schopenhauer himself described the structure as more organic than linear.
Okay.
He really emphasized that all the parts are deeply interconnected, and understanding later sections often requires revisiting earlier ones.
Okay.
He even suggested that to really grasp this single thought, the book should ideally be read more than once.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let these different perspectives kind of inform and enrich each other.
All right. And then Volume 2, which came much later, was sort of expanding on and clarifying these ideas.
Precisely. Volume 2 delves much deeper into the key topics that he introduces in Volume 1. It's supplementary explanations, further examples, his reflections on a wider range of subjects.
Okay, so let's dive into Volume 1 then.
Okay.
Starting with Book 1, Epistemology, where he lays out his idea of the world as representation.
Right.
What are the core ideas here?
Well, the very first sentence of the book, I think, is absolutely crucial. He says, "The world is my representation."
Okay.
So he's immediately establishing the subjective nature of our experience.
Okay.
In this first book, he focuses on how the world appears to us, and he argues that this appearance is structured and ordered by what he calls the principle of sufficient reason.
And that's just the idea that everything that is must have a reason or a cause?
Exactly.
I mean, that seems pretty intuitive, right?
It is. It is. It's how we generally make sense of the world.
Yeah.
And Schopenhauer argues that this is the fundamental ordering principle of the world as representation.
Okay.
It encompasses our understanding of space, time, and causality. And it's through this framework that we perceive a world of distinct objects related in understandable ways. And then later in Book 3, when he talks about aesthetics, he's going to revisit this, but he's going to look at it independent of this principle of sufficient reason,
Okay.
which is what opens up the realm of Platonic ideas and our experience of art.
Okay, so Book 1 sets the stage by saying, here's how we perceive and make sense of the world.
Exactly.
Book 2 then shifts the focus to what's underneath it all.
Right, the world as will.
The world as will.
Mhm.
So how does he bridge that gap?
Well, in Book 2, he makes his central and most radical claim that this underlying essence, the Kantian thing in itself, is indeed the will.
Okay.
And his reasoning goes something like this. Anything that exists outside of time and space, which are just features of our perception, couldn't be individuated, right? It couldn't be distinguished from anything else. So therefore, this thing in itself must be a single, unified entity.
Okay.
And everything we experience, including our individual selves, is just a manifestation,
Okay.
an expression of this one underlying will.
And this process of the unified will becoming this diverse world, all
Yeah.
the individual objects and beings and so on, that's what he called objectification.
Objectification, right. The will objectifies itself in the multiplicity of objects and phenomena that we perceive through the lenses of space and time.
Okay.
Right.
So he called this the principium individuationis.
Principium individuationis, right, the principle of individuation.
Oh, nice.
So According to Schopenhauer, plurality, individuality, these are only possible within the spatiotemporal forms of our perception.
Okay.
Right. The will itself, this groundless fundamental force, exists outside the reach of this principle of sufficient reason.
So even forces like electricity and gravity, he saw those as expressions of this.
Precisely.
Okay.
He viewed all phenomena in the natural world as different grades of the will's objectification. So, each embodying this essential striving.
Okay.
And even our capacity for reason, for cognition, is ultimately in service to the demands of this will.
And this is where we get the famous or infamous, depending on your point of view,
Right.
Schopenhauerian pessimism.
Yes, yes.
So where does that come from?
It arises directly from his understanding of desire.
Okay.
So he argues that desire is the root of all suffering.
Okay.
Unfulfilled desires are painful. They create the sense of lack of dissatisfaction. Right. And even the experience of pleasure when we finally get what we want,
Yeah.
it's just a temporary cessation of that pain.
It's just a break from the pain.
Yeah, a brief release from the striving.
Okay.
But it's always fleeting, cause new desires inevitably arise, and the cycle starts all over again.
So life is just this constant back and forth between wanting something and then getting a little break from wanting it.
Yeah.
And then wanting something else.
Pretty much.
That is a pretty bleak
It's not the most uplifting.
outlook.
No.
But then we come to book 3,
Right.
aesthetics.
Yes.
And this is often seen as offering some kind of escape or solace from this.
Right, exactly. In Book 3, he explores aesthetic contemplation as a temporary escape from the will.
Okay.
So when we engage with something aesthetically, whether it's art or a beautiful scene in nature,
Yeah.
we perceive it not as an individual object that might satisfy our desires, but as what he calls a universal Platonic idea.
Okay, so Platonic ideas, these timeless, perfect forms, like the idea of a circle or the idea of beauty that exists kind of beyond the everyday world.
Yes, beyond the world of appearances, beyond space and time.
Okay.
Right. And in this state of contemplation, the individual can lose their sense of self, their desires, their concerns,
Okay.
and become what he calls a pure, will-less subject of knowledge.
Wow.
Right.
So we step outside of the...
You step outside of that, yeah.
Okay.
And this is where the concept of genius comes in, right?
Yeah. For Schopenhauer, genius isn't some mystical gift. It's really just this heightened capacity for this will-less apprehension of the Platonic ideas.
Okay.
And those individuals that have a high degree of genius can then communicate these experiences through art, right?
Yeah.
They can create works that allow other people to access these states.
So art as this kind of conduit to this...
Yeah, a doorway.
Okay.
A doorway to this transcendent realm. Now, he also makes a distinction between beauty and the sublime, right?
He does.
So it's not all just about pretty pictures and beautiful music and so on.
Right. So beauty for him arises from objects that clearly and effectively facilitate this will-less contemplation
Okay.
by embodying these ideas in a readily accessible way. The sublime, on the other hand, involves a different kind of experience.
Okay.
It arises from encountering something that is overwhelming or even threatening
Okay.
to our individual will. So we might initially feel a sense of fear or insignificance,
Yeah.
but through our intellect and contemplation,
Yeah.
we rise above that feeling.
Yeah. Right.
We recognize the power of the will in nature, while our own individual will is kind of subdued.
Right.
And so that results in a different, more powerful kind of aesthetic elevation.
Okay. Interesting. And then he had this whole thing about music, which is kind of fascinating.
He thought music was the highest art. Unlike the other arts, which he believed objectify the will indirectly through the mediation of these ideas,
Right.
he argued that music is a direct objectification of the will.
Okay.
It bypasses the ideas.
Wow.
And so it's independent of the phenomenal world, the world as representation.
There's a direct line
Yeah,
to the will.
exactly. He famously said that the other arts speak of the shadow of the will, music speaks of the will itself.
Wow.
Yeah, and so its effect is much more profound because of this immediate connection.
So listening to music is almost like getting a glimpse.
Yeah, it's like a
Yeah.
direct line to
Yeah.
the essence of things.
Wow. Okay. And then book 4, we're back in the realm of the will, but now the focus is on ethics.
Right.
So how should we live in a world governed by this blind striving?
Right. Well, in Book 4, he identifies two fundamental orientations. the affirmation and the denial of the will to life. And he develops these ideas further in his prize essays on the freedom of the will and the foundations of morality.
And his views on free will were, let's just say, unconventional.
Yeah, he was a hard determinist.
Okay.
He denied the existence of free will as we commonly understand it. So this ability to make uncaused choices.
Okay.
He saw the will as the underlying force and our individual actions as determined by this will and the chain of causality.
Okay.
So the choices we think we're making freely are still expressions of this deeper will.
So if we're not really free to choose our actions, then what does it even mean to talk about ethics?
Right. Well, for Schopenhauer, ethics arises from how we relate to this will and how we recognize our connection to others.
Okay.
He argues that egoism, this drive to prioritize our own needs and desires above all else, is a manifestation of the will to life.
Okay.
And this leads to conflict
Yeah.
as individuals compete.
Makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
But compassion, for him, emerges from transcending this egoistic illusion of separateness.
Okay.
It's a recognition that the suffering of others is fundamentally our own suffering.
Because we're all connected by this will.
Exactly. Yeah. It's this intuitive understanding of interconnectedness.
Okay. Now, given this, somewhat pessimistic view of the will,
Right.
you might think that he would say, well, just indulge it, just,
Right.
go with it. But he actually says, no, we should deny it.
Right. He points towards a path of denial.
Okay. And he even talks about asceticism, like this really extreme form of self-denial.
Yes. He saw asceticism as the ultimate goal.
Wow.
It's a complete negation of the will.
So that's like a really hardcore
It is.
spiritual path.
It is.
Okay.
He argued that suicide is not a true negation.
Okay.
It's merely the destruction of one particular manifestation of the will.
It'll just pop up somewhere else.
Exactly.
Okay.
True denial, for him, involves a gradual weakening of the will
Okay.
through self-denial, detachment from desires, and a focus on compassion.
Okay.
And he found resonance with this in Eastern traditions, particularly Buddhism and Vedanta Hinduism, which he really admired. He was very critical, by contrast, of what he saw as the more optimistic and less profound traditions of Protestantism, Judaism, and Islam.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what does this denial of the will lead to? Like, what's the end state here?
It's the recognition that our individuality is ultimately an illusion,
Okay.
that the world in itself is not divided into separate selves.
Okay.
And this understanding tranquilizes the will, leading to a kind of liberation from the cycle of desire and suffering.
Okay.
He described this state as nothingness,
Okay.
but he explicitly connects it to the Buddhist concept of prajaparamita.
Okay.
It's the cessation of willing itself,
Right.
and with it, the cessation of the world as we experience it.
So a radical
Sure.
transcendence
Yeah.
of our ordinary existence.
Yeah.
Okay, so volume 2, which came much later, what are the key insights there?
Volume 2 really provides a more detailed exploration of the themes introduced in Volume 1. It includes a series of essays that go into specific topics, like death, sexuality, which he saw as a primary way the will perpetuates itself,
Right.
right? And he also has now outdated theories on genetics
Okay.
that he gets into.
So it's really a deepening and broadening of that initial.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this book was not an immediate hit, right?
No. Initially, the reception was quite lukewarm.
Okay.
For many years, his work was ignored.
Wow.
But in the later part of his life, it started to gain traction.
Right.
And after his death, he became one of the most influential philosophers in Germany.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So who are some of the figures that were really impacted by his work?
Well, artists in particular were really drawn to his ideas,
Okay.
especially his aesthetic. So Wagner, Mahler,
Okay.
Thomas Mann, Hermann Hesse, even later figures like Borges, Beckett, they all felt a connection to his vision.
And Mahler's.
Mahler famously described the world as will and representation as the most profound writing on music he had ever encountered.
Wow. That's quite...
Quite an endorsement.
Yeah. And it wasn't just artists, right?
No.
Philosophers, too.
Yeah.
Like Nietzsche.
Nietzsche, Mainlander.
Yeah.
They both described their first encounter with Schopenhauer's work as life-changing.
Wow.
Yeah.
And even Wittgenstein.
Yeah, so his ideas about the will, the critique of Kant, his thoughts on language and ethics had a significant impact on early Wittgenstein.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the later Wittgenstein, who's very different in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's a nuanced relationship.
Yeah.
But Schopenhauer's emphasis on the limits of language and his concern with ethical questions really resonated with the young Wittgenstein.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so and then it goes even beyond philosophy and the arts.
Yeah.
There's this surprising connection to science.
Yeah.
Darwin actually quoted the world as will and representation in The Descent of Man.
Really?
Yeah, he noted some interesting parallels.
Wow.
Yeah, and Schopenhauer himself was a proponent of what we now call evolution.
And then even Einstein called Schopenhauer a genius, and he credited him with influencing his views on the independence of spatially separated systems, which has connections to Schopenhauer's Principium Individuationis.
Wow.
And Schrödinger was also intrigued by his ideas.
Wow.
So really wide-ranging.
So from philosophy to the arts to even like fundamental biology and physics,
Yeah.
that's quite a legacy.
It is. It is.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what would you say is the most crucial thing for someone to take away from the world as will and representation?
At its heart, Schopenhauer is offering us a very challenging, insightful perspective on the nature of reality. He asks us to consider the world we experience not as objective, but as something shaped by our own minds, as representation. And beneath this surface of appearances, he posits this relentless force, the will, which he argues is the essence of everything.
Right.
And from this central idea, he draws implications for how we understand art, ethics, and the possibility of liberation from suffering.
And I think that's the real aha moment, right? You know, it's seeing how all these seemingly diverse ideas are actually interconnected by this, complex but single thought
Exactly.
about will and representation.
It really makes you question the very nature of your experience
Yeah.
and your place in the world.
So for those of you who, whose interest has been piqued,
Right.
I mean, there's a lot more to explore.
There is.
You can delve into specific books or chapters of the world as will and representation.
Absolutely.
Or you can look into some of his other writings, like his work on the principle of sufficient reason, or his essays on ethics and aesthetics.
Yeah.
So as you're going about your day after listening to this,
Yeah.
think about Schopenhauer's concept of the will, this blind striving force that underlies everything.
Right.
How does that resonate with your own experience?
Yeah.
Your experiences of desire,
Yeah.
of longing, of dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
And does his idea of aesthetic contemplation, or even this radical idea of denying the will, offer any new perspectives on this very old question of how to be happy?
Exactly.
It's a lot to consider, but that's what these deep dives are all about. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.